Hey beauties, and welcome back to the Jolie Beauty channel, and welcome to another episode of True Crime Glam Time. Yes, it's the first episode of 2022 and I am so excited because I have so many plans for this year. You guys have suggested many cases and I've been really getting my teeth into them. So if you're excited for more true crime, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you get a notification every time I upload a new episode. Is there ever a justified reason for committing murder? Well, that is the question I'm going to put to you as we explore today's case. Today we're going to be investigating the so-called UK's Hannibal the Cannibal serial killer, Robert Maudsley. This is a man that has now spent 38 years in solitary confinement, and that is 23 hours a day on his own. He's let out just for a little bit of exercise and then he's put back into his glass case. You will definitely see in this case that there are many parallels to Hannibal Lecter and that film series. There are rumours that Robert's custom-made glass cell in Wakefield prison was a source of inspiration for Hannibal the Cannibal. So let's do a little bit more exploring into the case of Robert Maudsley. Before I begin today, I do need to do some housekeeping. This case really touches on a multitude of sensitive topics. These include torture, murder, child abuse, sexual assault and sexual abuse. So if any of those themes are too heavy for you to listen to at the moment, don't worry, click off this video. It's always so important to put your mental health first, and I will see you in another video another time. But aside from that, let's get on with the case. So Robert Maudsley was born on the 26th of June 1953 and he was born in Toxteth, Liverpool, and this is in the north of England. He was the youngest boy of 4 siblings and he had 2 older brothers and 1 sister. Unfortunately, Robert and his siblings didn't have the best start in life. His father especially was a very abusive man. The 4 siblings grew up in a household of neglect and they were not protected by their mother. The neglect of the siblings was so obvious that eventually a neighbour saw what was going on and reported it to social services, and the siblings were taken away from the parents. Robert was only 2 when all 4 siblings were taken away to a care home, and this was an orphanage called Nazareth House, which was run by Roman Catholic nuns. And this is where the siblings stayed for many years, and they actually had, you know, quite a happy upbringing here. If you asked any of the siblings, they would say that their happiest childhood memories were actually at the orphanage. This was their first experience of order and just having somewhere that they could trust to put their heads down and feel really safe for the very first time. The siblings all bonded here. Whilst in the orphanage, the siblings did bond and they were pretty close. And their parents did visit a couple of times, but the boys actually thought they were orphans. They didn't really know who their parents were and they had no attachment to them whatsoever. Now the story goes that one day, one of Robert's brothers actually had the chance of being adopted. And because of this, Robert's grandparents were contacted as someone needed to authorise the adoption. Unfortunately, when this news got back to Robert's parents, they weren't happy and they decided to take all 4 siblings back. This is years after they'd been taken away. They had no idea who their parents were and they were happy, they were settled, and suddenly they were ripped away and basically forced to move in with strangers, and not just that, abusive strangers. And unsurprisingly, when the siblings went back to their parents' house, the abuse started again. But in some ways it was almost worse because by this point Robert's parents had 12 children in their house. This part of the story, I feel like there's such a failure with social services. For one, the children were taken away because of neglect. Then they're taken back by the parents and the parents have another 8 children. That's 12 children when they were being neglected when there were only 4 of them. So you can only imagine what that house was like, how they actually allowed them to take them back. I have absolutely no idea. I would hope that in 2022, this wouldn't happen, but absolutely shocking. So all 4 of the siblings were subject to abuse, but all the siblings would agree that their father had an extra special hate for Robert. They would all incur many beatings at the hands of their father, and it doesn't say too much about their mother. I feel like maybe she didn't do the beatings, but she definitely didn't protect them, and she might have egged them on a little. In some reports, that's what it says. Absolutely heartbreaking. Robert's account of the abuse is that he was locked in his room for 6 months, and he incurred beatings from his father 4 to 6 times a day. One of the assaults that Robert really remembers, and his siblings too, is that one day his dad brought in an air rifle to his room to give him a beating with it, and he cracked it over his back so hard that it broke the air rifle. It's just unbelievable that anyone could do that to a child. Literally awful. Robert also, in later years, after talking with a psychologist, spoke about how he was sexually assaulted by his father as well. I know. Father of the Year award goes to... So eventually Robert was taken into foster care. I couldn't find any details about why that happened, because not all the siblings were taken into foster care. Robert's father actually told all the other siblings that Robert had died. So when Robert was taken into care, he was separated from his siblings, obviously, and he didn't really have anyone. His siblings weren't looking for him because obviously they thought he'd passed away, which is another abusive thing really, isn't it? To tell your children that one of their siblings has died when they haven't. Once Robert was old enough, he ended up leaving his foster homes. I couldn't find too much information about how happy he was in the foster homes, but there's no stories from the foster homes. So I'm guessing it was just like one of those things where he was safe and he was like looked after, but he didn't really find true connection there, which is the same for many children that go through care. And at 16, he ran away to the bright lights of London City. I think a lot of people go to London when they're looking for a new start in life, and I think this is what Robert wanted. He wanted to create something of himself, he wanted to go to London, but alas, we all know London is quite a difficult place and you need money to live in London even back then. And Robert quickly got involved in the wrong kind of circles and got heavily into drugs. Robert developed an absolutely massive drug habit, and to fund his lifestyle in London, he began working as a rent boy. If you don't know what a rent boy is, it is a male prostitute. And there were quite early signs that Robert didn't really want this lifestyle for himself. He checked himself in and out of rehab, obviously trying to get off the drugs, and he actually reached out for psychiatric care. He would go into psychology facilities and tell them that he felt like committing suicide. He also said that he was hearing voices telling him to kill his parents. I mean, you'd think that'd be warning enough, but apparently it wasn't. And even though Robert was checking himself into rehab and telling these psychologists about all these warning signs he was having, it just seems that nobody really took notice of Robert. So Robert carried on being a rent boy in London, and he used to go to clubs and bars, all the usual places, trying to pick up men. And one day in 1973, he met a labourer called John Farrell. So John Farrell had just got divorced from his wife, so he was now out the closet and he was looking for men to hook up with. Farrell was looking for, shall we say, a male friend with benefits, and he couldn't really find that, so he turned to looking for a paid male friend with benefits, and that's when he came across Robert Maudsley. Robert and John were in a sexual relationship for around 5 to 6 months, and then one evening everything changed. John and Robert were starting to get intimate. They were kissing on the bed, And Robert at this point was quite high. He always used drugs. He kind of used the drugs as a way to dissociate from what he was doing as a male prostitute. And as he was lying there, John got up to his cupboard and wanted to show him something that he was quite excited about. So John pulls out these photos out of his drawer and brings them over to Robert. Now Robert, as I said, was super high on drugs, so it takes him a little while to realise what he's looking at. But as his eyes start to focus, he realises that John is showing him photos of children that he's abused. As Robert processes the images, he just freezes. He doesn't know what to do. I think he's shocked, and John is almost like looking to him to see if it turns him on, which is just so disgusting. But in Robert's head, he definitely was not excited about these images. He was the polar opposite, and he just sees red. Obviously, he's relating to the images through his own abuse that he's suffered from his own family. And this was possibly the worst thing that this man could have possibly shown Robert. So Robert pushes John down on the bed. And John, first of all, thinks, ooh, you know, he's getting kinky. We're having a little ooh. But he soon realises that Robert is not playing around. Robert grabs a rope and a hanger, loops it around John's neck, and he just keeps tightening it and tightening it and tightening it. Maudsley keeps on tightening this until John has turned completely blue. So usually at this point in cases, there's a big who did it. We're talking about the crime scene, how the police caught them. Oh, but not with Robert Maudsley. Oh, no, 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 no. He went and voluntarily handed himself into the police after this crime. This is why I spoke so much about him asking for help. I feel like this murder was almost a final cry, like, look at me, I need help, I'm a danger, I'm messed up, someone please take it seriously. There's also an aspect of he didn't really truly believe what he had done was 100% wrong. He saw himself as a vigilante, like somebody that was ridding the world of this terrible man. And that's the way he went to the police. So it really says a lot about him, the fact that he handed himself over to the police in this case. So of course it went to court and he was served an indeterminate life sentence, which is a life sentence that doesn't really have a particular guideline on it in terms of years that they need to serve. Because of his psychological background, they did not submit him to a normal prison. They took him to a high security psychiatric unit at Broadmoor Hospital, which is the infamous one in the UK that deals with people that might have mental disorders rather than being completely criminal based. So Robert had a quiet couple of years in Broadmoor, but in 1977 some plotting started between him and another inmate. With his accomplice David Cheeseman, they started collecting things to create weapons because they wanted to murder. Their victim was convicted paedophile David Francis, and as soon as they got their opportunity, they grabbed him and trapped him in one of the offices and they tortured him for 9 hours. 9 hours! Now, if you guys can imagine 1 hour on a treadmill and how much torture that feels like, okay, I shouldn't compare, I am joking. But 9 hours is a long time. Even the idea of keeping up the stamina to be able to torture someone for 9 hours with weapons made out of plastic spoons and parts of a radio. They tortured him by beating him, cutting him, hurting him in unspeakable ways. And you may be wondering, where were the staff? 9 hours is quite a long time just to be onlooking for this situation. And I agree. There are some reports here that just don't really make sense to me. I know the staff couldn't get in because the door was barricaded, but I feel like there might have been a little bit of, we don't want to go in there in this case, The staff report that they could hear screams, desperate screams the whole time. Suddenly, after the 9 hours, the screaming stopped. And when they looked through the window, Maudsley and his accomplice were holding up the lifeless body to the window so the staff could all see that the deed was done. Almost like raising up a trophy. Maudsley then came over to the door and unlocked it so they were able to get in to see what he'd done. And many reports say that the body had lots of minor torture injuries, so he was cut in like sensitive places, like in his mouth and on his genitals, but then it's like the torture amplified until the violence was quite severe. Well, I say quite severe, extremely severe. The body of his victim had had a plastic spoon shoved all the way into his brain. And this is where the Hannibal the Cannibal headline, I think, started. The press started reporting that Maudsley had eaten a part of the brain because obviously the spoon was there, though this is something that has never been confirmed, and I think he's denied that he hasn't eaten the brain, and there has been no evidence that any part of the brain was missing. So that is the sensationalist UK press for you. There is a lot on the internet about why these staff couldn't break down the door. And to be honest with you, I can imagine it's a pretty solid lock. But just imagine seeing and witnessing this for 9 hours and just not being able to do anything about it. So interestingly, after, Maudsley was actually trialed as a criminal, and, you know, like a real criminal, not somebody who's dealing with psychological problems. He was, of course, convicted guilty, and he was actually sentenced to serve time at Wakefield Prison. I think their reasoning behind this is they thought that he had been planning this murder with an accomplice, and it was too premeditated to be a psychotic case. So it was not like he had a psychotic episode and then lashed out. He planned this, he had the weapons. It was all pre-planned. That was their reasoning behind him going to Wakefield. Now, if you know anything about Wakefield Prison, it has got the nickname Monster Mansion because it is the high security prison in the UK, I'd say. It's a category A prison. Pretty much every UK baddie is in there, like Ian Huntley was in there, Charles Bronson, you get the idea. It is an extreme prison. A statistic I found quite interesting was at the time there was around 700 inmates at Monster Mansion or Wakefield Prison, and 600 of these were convicted sex offenders. So 600 out of 700 were exactly the type of person that Maudsley wanted to kill. Talk about putting a cat among the pigeons. I find that just such poor judgment, but I guess, like, where are you going to put him? He's already killed somebody in a high security place. Like, where are you going to put him to keep other people safe? And unfortunately, the reality is, in most secure places, you're going to be among rapists, sex offenders, everything that Maudsley hates. And even though Maudsley seems to think it's okay to kill the bad guys, these bad guys still have families, maybe children, and letting them live alongside somebody that possibly or definitely wants to kill them, it's almost neglectful of their care, because even though they are in prison, they are of duty of care of HM prison system. But anyway, I digress. So Maudsley only lasted a few months before he was ready to kill again. I'm not surprised. I feel like he must have been surrounded by these people that he absolutely hated and had said he wanted to kill every single day, so that does not surprise me. July 1978, Robert Maudsley went on a killing spree inside Wakefield Prison. Reports say that he planned to kill 7 to 8 offenders. Again, Maudsley had created some makeshift weapons inside of the prison, and he went around on the hunt for his first victim. The first inmate in the firing line was a man called Sauni Darwood, and he was a 46-year-old convicted sex offender who had raped and murdered his wife. Sauni had never actually had anything on paper to do with children, so his sexual offences were of adult nature. However, there is a theory because a couple of weeks before, Robert was actually being taught in a language class by Sauni, and there is a theory that Sauni might have said something in front of Robert which led Robert to want to kill Sauni in particular. That's never been confirmed, so maybe there was something that was said between them that confirmed that Sauni was just the kind of person that Robert wanted to kill, because he was very targeted with Sauni. So Robert invited Sauni into the cell, and I'm not quite sure why Sauni went in. There are some reports that Robert that day invited a few people into the cell, and most people refused because they knew his history and they were very wary of him, as they should probably be. There is some suspicions that Sauni went into the cell for drugs or sex, but only Sauni will know why he went in. And as soon as Robert got him into the cell, he launched his attack. He stabbed Sauni multiple times in the head with the makeshift knife that he'd created. And then, in a similar way to his first murder, he grabbed some string and tied it around his neck and just made sure the job was done. He then hid Sauni's body underneath his bunk bed and just went out into the corridor just to see what was going on. What's up, guys? I say that, but in fact, he was looking straight away for another victim. So Robert went off to the yard, and here he spent an hour just chatting, speaking to all the other inmates, casual, you know, probably just having a good think about, you know, who he wanted to kill next. And I'm not sure if this is something that the other inmates might have suggested, but he made a beeline for his next victim, who was William Roberts. This is where I think it's quite obvious that his killing is quite tactical, quite methodical. He hadn't actually ever met William Roberts, but he was the most, prolific child sex offender in the prison. So Maudsley actually found out where William's cell was and crept in. William was face down on the bed, just having an afternoon nap, and that's when Maudsley launched his attack. He stabbed him with his knife in the back of the head, in the neck, everywhere. This was a very, very frenzied attack. Roberts obviously jumped up and rolled over to try and defend himself, but Maudsley just carried on stabbing him, and he stabbed him in his neck and his chest, and in the end there was over 40 stab wounds, and those are the only ones that you could count, because in the end they couldn't actually count how many stab wounds were in the head. To finish off his kill, he took his head and smashed it against the wall repeatedly. Robert coolly and calmly went to find the guards, put the bloody knife on the table and said, "I think you'll find there's 2 missing for roll call tonight." Obviously, this is when the guards ran off to find out what was going on, and they found the horrific bloody scene, and also eventually found the other body underneath his bed. Many people feel like these attacks could have been an attempt to get back to Broadmoor. They feel like Robert felt like he was happier at Broadmoor instead of Wakefield, and he almost had this simultaneous feeling of it was like the orphanage, and then he got ripped back to his parents and he just wanted to go back. But if that was what he was trying to do, it didn't work, because when he was trialled, he got 2 more life terms put on his sentence, and he was just taken back to Wakefield until 1980, where he got sent to a prison in the Isle of Wight. And here he met a psychologist, Bob Johnson. Bob and Robert spoke for a couple of years, and Robert was actually making really good progress with Bob about opening up about his past and talking through a lot of his issues. They discovered all about how Maudsley felt about being taken away from the orphanage, which was his safe haven, and going into the details of the abuse that he had from his parents.
I was brought up in Liverpool, and I spent approximately 16 years in various orphanages from the age of 6 months. As I understood it at that time, the nuns were my family and the other children. And here's a man and woman who call themselves my mother and father come and want me to take me away, and I never really knew them. Well, I resented that, but I was forced, and I went back home. All I can remember of it is beatings and being locked in a room. I was locked in a room for approximately 6 months, and depending how my father felt, he would beat me perhaps once, twice a day. And I can always still remember now the key being turned into lock. When he came in, he'd have a poker or a piece of wood in his hand, or even a rifle. And I can remember he busted a rifle on my back. It was a .22 air rifle. And when he'd beaten me, he'd close the door, I'd hear the key turn, and he'd walk away laughing.
One of the major quotes from this whole case is that Maudsley said if he had killed his parents in 1970, then no one else had needed to die. And Bob is on many documentaries talking about how Maudsley would actually see his parents when he was doing the attack. Like, reality and his parents would momentarily overlap while he was assaulting these other people. But Maudsley was moved back to Wakefield in 1983, ready for solitary confinement, and when he got there he found a custom-made bulletproof glass box waiting. So if you have watched any of the Hannibal films, it is pretty much the same kind of deal. The cell is around 5 meters by 5 meters and there is no privacy. It's made of glass. There is a toilet and a mattress on the floor, and that's pretty much it. The guards, to serve him food, they have a little hatch and they slide the food through the glass hatch. It really looks like it's made from Hollywood. But if you were to ask Maudsley if he related to the Hannibal films, then he would actually say no. He says he relates his life more to a film called Murder in the First. I can't say I've ever watched it, but I did do a little bit of digging to see what it was about. The film is actually about a guy that is trapped in solitary confinement for a very minimal crime, and the prosecution just escalates and escalates until he's doing this really unfit sentence, this really over the top sentence for the crime that he committed. I think he stole $5 or something in the beginning. And I just thought that was really interesting. It just shows how Maudsley doesn't really feel like what he's done is so terrible for his punishment. So as you can hear from that last clip, solitary confinement has really affected Maudsley. He now can't speak properly. He's got a speech impediment just from not practicing and using that part of his his muscles and his mind. He also experiences tics, which are suddenly involuntary movements. I think we can all agree that anything that's going to keep you in solitary confinement is bound to get to you and your psychology. There are a lot of people that feel like Maudsley has not been dealt with in the best way. Paul Harrison, a high-end police detective, has even said that he feels like Maudsley is not like other serial killers. He's very intelligent, he loves poetry, reading, music, and he's actually very social. He has written to the Queen herself to actually try and get Maudsley out of solitary confinement because he feels like the punishment is too harsh. I'm just going to read this quote from Maudsley that kind of explains how he feels about his solitary confinement. The prison authorities see me as a problem, and their solution has been to put me in solitary confinement and throw away the key, to bury me alive in a concrete coffin. It does not matter to them whether I am mad or bad. They do not know the answer and they do not care, as long as I'm kept out of sight and mind. I am left to stagnate, vegetate, to regress, left to confront my solitary head-on with people who have eyes but don't see, and who have ears but don't hear, who have mouths but don't speak. My life in solitary is one long period of unbroken depression. In many of his notes, Maudsley asks to die. He talks about taking cyanide, that he doesn't want to live anymore. And then on the other hand, he asks to have a budgie as company in his cell, saying he's not going to kill it, he's not going to do anything weird with it, he just wants company, which is so sad. I mean, I can't ever really feel so sorry for murderers. There are definitely victims in this case, but on the other hand, being locked away for that long, longer than my lifetime, 23 hours a day. I think I'd want to die as well. So there's been years and years of this back and forth. Should Robert Maudsley be able to go back into the normal prison system, or at least have some more company and not be in confinement? And there is a very recent update in this case. So in December 2021, just gone, Robert Maudsley launched another appeal to see if he could spend Christmas out of confinement and with other prisoners. And he lost this appeal. And not only did he lose the appeal, he actually will never be able to re-appeal for this again. So that will be it. Robert Maudsley will die in his glass box alone and without company ever again. So that is the case of Robert Maudsley. I am so excited to hear your thoughts on this case. I feel like there might be a divide in opinion, I don't know. So my questions to you are murders ever justified? Should Robert Maudsley be left in solitary confinement for the rest of his life? Do we owe Robert Maudsley another chance because of the failings of the system in his early life? I can't wait to read your comments on this case. If you have any other cases you want me to cover, then please leave them in the comment section down below. Before you go, I'd love it if you give the video a thumbs up. It does help out on the channel and the algorithm, and it means I can spend even more time researching cases for you. But that's all for this week. I hope you enjoyed our True Crime Glam Time. I certainly did. And I can't wait to see you in the next case. Stay safe, everyone. Mwah.